Naomba utaanza na your name, then title.
My name is Professor Francis Aduol, Vice-Chancellor, Technical University of Kenya. I'm also the chairman of the Vice-Chancellors Committee of Public Universities. Yeah. In 1989, the government established a fees schedule for university students. The fees schedule covered tuition and accommodation and student upkeep. The total amount of money then was 120,000 shillings per student per year. It was taken as a general blanket figure for the university system at the time. They did not make distinctions between programs that students were studying. And this 120,000 shillings was considered to be divided as 34,000 shillings would go towards student upkeep and books and accommodation. 86,000 shillings would go towards student tuition. Now, our immediate interest, let us focus on the 86,000 shillings, which was the student tuition at the time. Then it was adopted that the government would be responsible for 70,000 shillings and the student would bring 16,000 shillings, making a tuition total of 86,000 shillings. So officially, it can be taken that because from 1989 to now, that position has not changed officially. Although the government funding to universities per student has gone up by a significant amount. But on the student side, the payment continues to be 16,000 shillings. This is 30 years down the line. That by itself is not a problem. It is not a problem that students are paying 16,000 shillings. In fact, they could even be paying zero. It doesn't matter. The challenge now is that many universities are not in a position to meet their costs and offer the kind of education they would like to offer to our students who come to universities. Today, or let me put it this way, in 2015-2016, the Vice-Chancellors, through a committee of themselves, established what they considered were appropriate costs for individual programs in the university system. The Universities Act 2012 provides that funding to universities, public universities, should be based on what is called differentiated unit cost. And this is in the law itself, which is very good for us, really, because it brings order in how we fund our universities. What differentiated unit cost does, it tells us the amount of money that you need to pay for a given program in the university system. Currently, that varies from 144,000 shillings according to our calculations as Vice-Chancellors by 2015-2016, 144,000 shillings for programs in the humanities and social sciences, to 720,000 shillings per year for clinical programs in medicine and dentistry. All the others are in between. Today, the university system in Kenya has 233,218 students. In 2018-2019, 233,218 students were enrolled in public universities for degree programs. On the basis of the differentiated unit cost that I've just mentioned, we find that the total amount of money required to cover for the students' tuition, this students' tuition in 2018-2019 would be 59 billion shillings, 532 million, 312,000. This should be the cost. This gives an average of 255,265 shillings per student. 255,265 shillings per student. If you compare this with 86,000 shillings of 1989, you see that the current estimated cost is 3 times what it was 30 years ago. The student continues to pay 16,000 shillings. So if we were going purely on a pro rata basis, then the student needs to pay 48,000 shillings. However, there is no need for a student to pay 48,000 shillings if the costs of tuition for a particular student would be covered through government funding. See, if the government were to fund this cost per student, there would be no need to ask students to pay fees. The challenge is the government in 2018-2019 brought into university through a recurrent expenditure cost as recurrent expenditure costs. This is excluding development. Recurrent expenditure is what we use to run on a daily basis and to pay salaries.
That's 2018-2019.
In 2018-2019, the government gave to all the public universities 36 billion 020, that is 20 million 761,906. This is the money. Yeah, it is 36 billion 20 million, in other words 020, 761,906. This is what the government brought into the university system to cover for the running of the programs at the university on a daily basis. I've just indicated to you that the actual cost, according to, if we use the differentiated unit cost, would be 59 billion shillings. You see? So you can see there is already a huge shortfall, isn't it? Now, let us assume over and above this that if you compare this 36 billion vis-a-vis the 59 billion that is required, you find that the government funded the universities to the tune of 61% overall. Now, therefore, there's a shortfall of 39%. The students themselves at 16,000 shillings per student would bring in 3 billion shillings. 3 billion shillings you have written. 731 million 488,000. Yeah. Now that means the universities had available to themselves 39 billion 752,249,906, which is roughly 67% of the total budget. So you can see there is already, the universities are running with a shortfall of about 1/3 of the cost that they need. And we want to ask ourselves, our discussion, where do we get Parliament, was to illustrate to Parliament that this gap needs to be bridged. How it gets bridged is another story. It can get bridged by the government making available the funding to universities to make it possible for the university to run their programs comfortably, or alternatively, if the government is not in a position to fund fully the differentiated unit cost of running a program in the university, then this cost must be shared between the government and the student and the university. The universities currently are already contributing a substantial amount of money towards running of the programs. Because if you look at it from the point that the total amount of money available to universities on the average would cover just 2/3 of the cost. And 2/3 of the cost is basically the salary. The average salary cost in the public university system is 2/3 of the cost. This is common with many universities in the world. The universities that do very well, very, very well, would spend about 50% of their budget on staff costs. But the average figure is usually around 65%. So if the money we have from the government is 66% of what we need, you can see that the universities can barely just pay salaries. Now, this is where the problem begins. The universities with that money are not able to pay the salaries properly, so they start incurring debts. You see, the universities have a lot of debts, and you have heard about statutory deductions which we cannot remit. You have heard about our inability to pay suppliers. It comes from this, because the money that is coming to us for a government student is already very low. However, the universities are already making substantial contribution towards the running of the universities. But this was largely through Module 2, which is also now dwindling. Now, I need to clarify a point here. It is always said that universities are making a lot of money, which they are not declaring. That is not true. If you go into the government estimates book for 2018-2019, you will find that as much as the government has given the universities the 36 billion that I've talked about, the A in A that is coming in from the universities itself is 36 billion 099 171 604, and this is listed in the government book. This means the total budget approved for universities by Parliament in 2018-2019 is 72 billion shillings. But that 72 billion shillings, 49.9% of it is coming from government, and 50.1% of it is coming from the university. But you will ask, if we have 72 billion shillings and we need 59 billion shillings, why are we in trouble? We're in trouble because the 36 billion that I'm counting is largely coming from Module 2. It is not 100% Module 2. It is coming from a Module 2 student. And you're not going to use the money that a Module 2 student has given you for their own education to support another student who is funded by government who is not paying their full fees. This is where the problem comes in. But nevertheless, we find ways in which, after we have supported the Module 2 student, whatever is left, and especially what the universities have made through other income generation sources, these are the things that make it possible for the universities to survive every month up to the end of the year. But it is with a lot of difficulties, because the amount of money that the universities are generating cannot by itself bridge that big gap between 39 billion shillings and 59 billion shillings. So we must ask ourselves as Kenyans, how do we bridge this gap? One straightforward way would be to say, let the taxpayer cover the cost and pay for the entire cost of studying for any student in the university system. But what about if that can happen? And that is what couldn't happen in 1989. And that is why the government decided that the student will bring in 18.6% of the tuition. The 48,000 of the total cost of 255 would be 18.8%. of the tuition. So it is up to us to decide which way we want to go. Secondly, vice-chancellors are themselves not in a position to decide what fees will be paid by what student, because this is a national issue. The reason the 16,000 shillings has never been touched for 30 years is because it is the government to decide whether it can go up or not. We as vice-chancellors can only make proposals that these are the options available to us to be considered by the government. So when we say 48 billion shillings, it is the logical way for us, but it doesn't follow that that is what the government will also agree with, or that is what, let me say, that is, it doesn't mean that that is also what the government will adopt. This thing will require extensive discussions. It will require the government to look at various sources of funding that can go to universities. And then eventually, we as Kenyans, in my opinion, including the parents, because at the end of the day, all of us are parents to students in our universities. If you don't have a child in university today, probably you're going to have one tomorrow, or probably you already had one. We have to agree as Kenyans where we want to go. Now, if we don't do this, I think you asked me a question, what motivated this? The point is, the Kenyan university just now is not very competitive internationally. When you look at the world rankings, one of the latest ones shows that the only university that is ranked in the top 10 in Africa, in Kenya, is the University of Nairobi. But even the University of Nairobi, when you go and you look at the column on excellence, because there are 4 major factors that particular ranking considers. If you consider the column about excellence, which is the measure of the scholarship that is coming out of the university, then University of Nairobi becomes number 36 in Africa. You see. Now, the top universities in Africa are the South African universities and universities in North Africa. If we are going to compete, we have to have, first, we need quality staff in good numbers. There are some very excellent scholars in our universities, I can assure you, but they are not in sufficient numbers. We need to have good numbers so that we can begin to make impact. And the reason we don't have them in good numbers is because a large number of Kenyans who would otherwise be teaching in our universities are teaching abroad. The nearest destination today is South Africa. And so when you see South African universities ranking high, there is a very strong contribution being made there by Kenyans. Why should these Kenyans, who most of them got educated through the sweat of the Kenyan person, go to promote education in another country and ours is suffering? It is because we are not putting in enough resources to make sure that our universities can compete. I must add that the universities in Kenya have tried very hard to ensure that they maintain good standards, but we could make the standards better. And what I mean by this is many Kenyan students, when they go abroad for further studies, don't have problems, but we can make it better. And those of us who are running the universities know that we could make it better, but we need resources to do that. So we have to decide. As long as we keep on funding the universities at low level, our universities are going to continue struggling. And the person who is going to lose in the long run is the Kenyan person, because the universities are going to produce people who are not good enough for our economy. And when we produce so many people who are not good enough for the economy, it means that we are creating an employment of otherwise well-educated people. This is where the challenge begins. So it is not like the government has said that they're going to increase fees up to 48,000. No, this was the gist of what we were trying to explain. Good.
Maelezo mazuri sana Profesa. Na labda mmewasilisha pendekezo lenyewe kwa Wizara ya Elimu?
Kwa wizara?
Proposal ya hiyo increment ya fee?
To the ministry?
Yes.
No. We have not forwarded a formal proposal to the ministry. But when we had a meeting with Parliament, it was agreed that we would put together the resolutions that came from that meeting, or the recommendations. Let me say, they were not formal resolutions, recommendations that came from that meeting. And very soon they will be forwarded to the ministry. That is...
mzazi asiwe na waziwazi labda
unajua kuna waziwazi wengine
wamefikiria sasa hiyo ni final.
No.
Kwa hivyo serikali inaweza shughulikia ama ikishindikana
exactly. There is no. This has not been discussed by anybody to the level that you can say it is a final. No. That was a suggestion by the Vice-Chancellors committee on one of the ways forward. So people should not panic that it is a decision that has been taken. No. It will require major discussions before we come to a conclusion on that matter. But the point is, we have to agree on where we want to go. Good.
Labda mtapata solution lini, labda unaweza kisia labda next month?
No, we are hoping in the next 3 months. In the next 3 months, we shall have had intensive discussions with the ministry. Yeah? We will have made formal presentations to the ministry. You have to understand, this was a discussion between us and Parliament. We have not had a discussion between us on this and the ministry formally. And we expect that in the next 3 months, we'll have our discussions, and then we will know which way it goes with the ministry.
Okay.
Yeah, so they should not, somebody should not panic. It was not meant that way. Good. Are we okay? Yeah, see you. So, I like this interview. In Kiswahili. Brilliant. That is